regulation reviews. No one hates more than you open up a regulation, 80 pages into it, you still don't know what you're seeing. So I especially love teaching our brand new folks out of college how to read a regulation, because there's some subtleties that most people miss. I like to use the old adage that 90% of what you need to know is in 10% of your rule. And the other 90% of the rule, you only use about 10% of the time. Now, I might get in trouble in some sections for that, but really what that boils down to is most of the phone calls as a consultant I get is, hey, I want to build this new tank. It's about this big. We think we're going to store this in it. Usually about this much volume throughout the year. What do you think I need to do? Those are most of the calls I get. And so a really great thing that we make all of our brand new engineers do is hand them a rule and say, tell me in a table what this rule says. Now that makes them think a little bit. Then I've had the opportunity to work with a number of clients. Environmental supervisor gets a brand new green engineer, or they get someone coming out of a unit transferring into their environmental department. They're brand new to the actual regulations themselves. They may be familiar with the equipment, hopefully. They may be familiar with some of the requirements that are on the equipment for monitoring and controls, but having to read this 80-page document with lots of legal language in it. So it's a great thing to see that aha moment when they understand, particularly with things like tanks and vents and loading. It really boils down to a few things can get you 90% of the information you need to know for that source. For instance, for a tank, what are your primary indicators for a tank on your requirements? Your size, your material stored, the date of construction, and how much volume you're sending through that vessel. Well, you use that to identify your control requirements. Do you need a fixed roof tank with a submerged pipe? Do you need an internal floating roof control? Do you need to send it to some external control device like a flare? Now, some of those same criteria may be slightly different, off by a few gallons or a few vapor pressure, but they're pretty similar to the next rule. In most states, most federal rules, you can just take this little graph and box you've built and just keep applying it rule by rule. So it's great when you can hand to a brand new green engineer a table and say, fill this out. And suddenly they become extremely intelligent and the smartest person they know on that regulation. And all they really did is have a table sitting by their phone. When someone calls and says, hey, I'm building this new tank, it's about 1,000 gallons, storing this material. What do I need to do? And this guy picks up the phone and says, oh, you just need to build this, have an internal floating roof. And boy, that person sounds so smart. So I love seeing it when our brand new engineers can just whip out an answer extremely quickly, because then you lead on to other information. You know you have an IFR? Well, then you know your monitoring requirements. You have a flare? Now you know your monitoring requirements. So again, that 90% information gets compacted very quickly, very concisely, into a nice, easy to read table. So taking these complex regulations and concise data to get what most people need on a day-to-day basis. Now, you always have the regulation to always fall back on, because there's going to be things that we just always have to look up. There's nuances to every regulation. But the great thing is if you're HON, if you're MON, if you're in the state of Texas and subject to the storage tank rules, if you're an SPSKB, guess what? The same criteria applies in each one. Your size, your vapor pressure, maybe your date of construction, and how much volume is going through your vessel. So the same criteria, suddenly you've become a storage tank regulatory compliance expert. And then the unique thing you can do is once that light bulb clicks, now you can look at vents. Well, what are your criteria for vents? Typically it's your flow rate and your concentration. Well, now you've got another table. You go to loading. It's the volume being loaded, material being loaded, and maybe the temperature, because, well, that changes the volatility. But again, taking those complex, cumbersome rules that take a lot of time to read and understand and teaching people, teaching your staff how to make them concise and easy to see. That's what I love doing. I love teaching people how to get there because I like building people smarter tools and I like helping people realize they can get there on their own.